I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl.
The accident was over a year ago. A second woman has been elected president. A 12th planet has been named in the solar system. The last wild polar bear has died. I slept through it all. I was here for my waking. He called it a beginning. He said it was good. I think he may have thought that anything I did was good.
Welcome to Transition Radio.
Well, good evening, good evening. Let me remove this particular overlay here. Let's see. There we go. Welcome, everyone. Well, tonight is not a live show. This is a pre-recorded show that will be airing on the 17th of June. And tonight we have a very special guest all the way from Australia. His name is Jeremy Luke Bate. Jeremy was born in England in 1965. He moved to Australia in 1974. He experienced gender confusion from a very young age, the age of 5. He transitioned in his early 30s and detransitioned 20 years later after becoming aware of the social political issues and questioning the science, in fact, the mainstream science in general. He also discovered the causes of his gender issue, which was DES, the so-called anti-miscarriage drug and potent estrogen given to millions of women between the 40s to the 70s, in which 20% of DES sons experience gender identity issues and being on the autism spectrum. He has 2 grown children and a grandchild. His message is to call into question transgender affirming treatment and promote the necessity to accept the priority of biological sex over gender ideology. Affirming treatment makes the unfounded assumption of born that way, quote unquote, and fails to recognize or treat comorbidities or look for the causes of gender confusion. He quotes, sex change is impossible and everyone should be helped to accept their biological sex. And I concur with that. Detransitioner shows that you can't triumph over gender confusion and that affirming treatment is unnecessary. And welcome to the show, Jeremy. Hey, Jeremy.
Hi, Maritza.
Thank you for being here. And a lot of what you say, I also concur and I scream it at the top of my lungs daily. I make a lot of videos on YouTube trying to bring forth that message. You and I are more or less the same age. I was born in 64 and you were born in 65. So,
yeah.
And my mother was also given DES because she was miscarriaging all the time. And it affects women as well as it affects men. And they were handing those DES like they were handing out candy back in the day.
For sure.
And we are the byproduct. But I very much agree with that statement you made. Sex change is impossible, and everyone should be helped to accept their biological sex. Unlike what they're doing now, it's like believing that you could alter your flesh and that you'll magically just be something that you never are or never will be.
Right.
So I wanted to share before I go into the questions some of your pictures so that people could, let me see here, how I get this to work. Okay, I guess this was you. Was that like before you transitioned, right? Looks like you were playing soccer or?
That was after transition. So I was playing women's soccer then.
Oh, okay. So you were actually in the women's team?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you in a little bit. How do you feel about that now? Let's see here. Let me share another one. So that was you during transition. Can you give us a little background on that picture, if you can?
Yeah, that was when I had transitioned as well. So I was probably in my 40s then.
40s. And how did you feel during that time?
I mean, generally okay. I was just living my life, and I kind of there came a certain point when I stopped caring so much about how I was presenting or how I was feeling, even about gender. I guess it was wearing off over a period of time. I was starting to get sick of it in a way as the time went on, and that was when I started questioning.
So, why do you think that you got to that point? Because I, feel the same way after 17 years, and even before then. I think after 5 years of living as a so-called man, I started really questioning the validity of what I was doing. Did that kind of happen with you as well?
Not so much the validity, more just the, I don't know, it's hard to describe it. Just it became more irrelevant over time, and then when I started looking into the science, that's when I questioned the validity. I was kind of ignoring looking at the science because I knew what it would signify. I knew what I would end up doing because I was questioning everything else, and eventually I just couldn't like ignore it any longer. So I started looking into it, and pretty much straight away detransitioned because the science was, it wasn't very convincing.
And so that's actually what got you the questioning of the science.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? What actually got you to look at the science?
So it was a time of initially, I don't know, I guess I'm just naturally curious or something. And eventually I started investigating mainstream science in general, people like Rupert Sheldrake, the science delusion. Basically, what I'd been told, what I'd thought was reality was not really valid. Science was based on so much unfounded assumptions. And then I had a political awakening as well. So I was questioning, because I was very much a left wing most of my life, into communism, everything. And at a certain point, I started questioning that. And it was looking into the demographic replacement in European countries that started me,
It's very
questioning
interesting.
everything.
It's very interesting you say that because it all correlates in the way that they try to get people to have the same hive mind, and they sell this product, and they literally just try to like brainwash people with all these things that they're saying, and the junk science and the false information that they put out there, and people believe it till, like you said, people like us who become very curious, because I'm the same way. I'm like so inquisitive. I drive people crazy, and I want to know the answers to everything, and it's probably part of our autistic nature, because I'm also part of that autistic spectrum, and most likely could be that DES product our mothers took. But people need to learn to question everything and not just go by face value about what they're told. And this whole gender confusion, this whole gender agenda is based on lies, and people are believing it because they're trying to numb a very deep pain that they have, and they're not aware of that
Yeah.
whatsoever. So, what was the earliest recollection you had that you were not like the other boys?
Yeah, well, when I was 5 years old, I was reading, learning how to read, and found myself identifying with the female characters in the book. And I was like, that just felt to me like I should have been a girl, even though I knew I was a boy. And that was pretty confusing to go through that. But I kept it to myself because I was pretty ashamed of those feelings. Didn't tell a single person. And then I went on to struggle with those feelings all my life. They kept on coming up every now and again.
So let me ask you, what do you think created those feelings in you? Because there's always something that happens in our life, that our environment, our parent, we get some form of molestation, something that makes us feel shame in the body that we have or in the person that we are. And then we kind of like wish away our life. We wish we were something else because of whatever situation. Was there something traumatic that happened in your life that made you feel that way?
Well, I guess you could say I had, there was a bit of misery in our childhood and a bit of, the father had anger issues, and I was kind of afraid of him. And I tried to look into other issues later that were seeming to be symptoms of trauma, but I was never able to identify any particular incident. But it wouldn't surprise me that, if something traumatized me. And being on the autism spectrum as well is like you can react to trauma differently when you're on the autism spectrum.
And something this small can be this big, just a word were you ever ashamed because you maybe acted differently than the other boys? You said your father had kind of like an anger issue. Did he ever make you feel ashamed of being you?
Yeah, there might have been a bit of that in there. I wasn't kind of manly enough, I guess. That I think it kind of showed, and people kind of recognized that I was more effeminate, gentle, kind of quiet. I was just into nature, and but the autism is a funny thing because it wasn't really recognized in those days, and it was only fairly recently that I got a diagnosis. So I actually went through many years of feeling like I was probably insane. That's the only thing I could think of, because of all my behaviors and the way I reacted to things, and how I got blamed for those reactions. Why are you trying to be different was what people were saying to me all my life. And once I got the diagnosis, I started to put it all together, and it's like my life made sense for the first time ever. That's what it felt like.
I can relate. People don't understand that our nervous system is responsible for a lot of our behaviors, the way that we think, the way that we react towards things. So being in that autistic spectrum really makes us very different in our behavior, in our action, in the way that we take in information. Were you close to your mother more so than you were with your father? Did you have
yes,
any?
I guess so.
Okay, so you
until
were
I hit my teens, and then I was just I guess pulling away.
So you felt safer on your mother, and needless to say, probably safer around women. You felt like you related more to women than you did men. So you probably took on a lot of that behavior, because people don't realize when you're young, you mirror the people that you're most close to. And that's why it's important to have that father figure so that he could teach the boys how to be men. And if you don't really have that, then that's very difficult to do. Can Can you elaborate?
Most of my life I felt like I've been afraid of men. Like, and that's been a real difficult thing as well, because it's like, it seemed very irrational. I couldn't really figure out what was going on there. And I had like kind of social phobia as well in general, so not liking being around people in general. So,
and that seems to be a very stereotypical behavior for a lot of individuals that are on the autistic spectrum, and also individuals that identify with gender confusion. It all goes hand in hand, and it's beyond me why they don't, that they don't really investigate that further. That instead of like investigating all of that, they really readily hand out hormones like it's candy and procedures like it was something very natural. And the fact is that we have neurologically impaired system that requires a lot more attention than the average individual. So was there any events that caused you to dislike your gender? I mean, I often hear people say that they knew from a very young age that they weren't the gender that they were born as, and they hated themselves and they hated their body, and they felt, if you were born a boy, they felt like a girl. And I always say there's no way of knowing what it feels like to be the opposite gender, because you can't know that unless you actually are. So do you feel that, I hate to use the word feel, was there any anything that caused you to dislike the gender that you were born as? Were you rejected by a friend? Something that made you dislike who you were?
I think a big aspect of this was feminism, because I became aware of those kind of issues fairly early on. I could see the women in my family, were having issues, and obviously, you're aware of the wider society. By the 70s, the feminism was a big deal. That impacted, looking back, that impacted a lot all the way to the 80s and 90s. So it was like, there's definitely a kind of an anti-male aspect to it that made me want to reject the male gender even more. I say that it was a definite aspect of this.
I've heard that often from a lot of MTFs, because I've been around a lot of MTFs since I was a big advocate for this kind of movement. And a lot of what I hear was that they dislike being men because men were terrible and men were this, that, and the other. I mean, all these things that they probably heard being said to them as they grew up. And I'm sure you heard that from the women around you. And so being a sensitive person, you don't want to be this terrible person or this terrible gender. So what's the next best thing? Wanting to transition into being a woman.
Yeah, exactly. The thing about feminism is that it's almost like it's a great ideology in a way, because it kind of fits in with people's experiences if they've known kind of men with toxic behaviors, and then it just kind of fits in perfectly. And unfortunately, to me, it's a false ideology, because, say, for example, people talk about the church, the Catholic Church or whatever, being sexist and patriarchal, but in actual fact, it's got all the answers. You don't actually need the ideology of feminism, because the church doctrine has it covered. It kind of gives a subscription for how men and women are supposed to behave in an honourable way, and if you follow those, then there is no need for anything else. The feminism is like it depends on not having Christianity in a way. And of course, we know that it's like comes from a Marxist background, so that's not surprising.
Like any of the other movements in today's world that try to create a division, divide and conquer, and pushing along an agenda in a very subtle way where people are not even aware of what's being placed in their heads and how they're being programmed and how they're being pitted against one another. And they've done that great. So, and it's funny because now, there's a fight between trans women and the feminists. I mean, it's like everybody fighting everybody and no one's really wanting to listen to one another and understand that these problems are being created for a reason. People have to really dig really deep. So you went through life being more of a mother's boy, kind of feared your father and feared other men. During your teenage years, how did you navigate that environment? Were you able to make friends? Did you have a girlfriend? Things of that nature?
No, I was extremely shy, so I didn't really have many friends. I stayed just with my family, and I did have a girlfriend at one point, but I was extremely shy and I didn't really do anything about it. It was like, it was like a kind of, definitely on the autism issues were impacting there. I was most at home just being alone in nature and going out drawing. So, yeah.
I could relate totally because that was me. I was happy just being inside my room playing my guitar, imagining my world. I would sit in my rocking chair because I used to love motion. I still do. And music and just like a daydreamer, constantly dreaming about things. I was really happy with the world that I was creating. And to this day, I love walking in nature. That's my favorite thing. That's like my therapy, my calming place. Yeah. And it was difficult to make friends. And again, that's all because we're neurologically impaired. And that's where they need to look deep within us and not give us these dangerous hormones and dangerous surgeries. So you did have a girlfriend. Were you attracted to women, or was that just an attempt to try to normalize yourself?
No, I was. I never kind of had any homosexual feelings, really. But yeah, there was. I think I must have been low testosterone or something though, because that attraction for women was no big deal for me. I just kind of could take it or leave it.
Right.
But it was later when I actually started taking testosterone after my detransition that I was like, it's like I saw women for the first time. That was a bit of a intense experience, but it was like, it just made me realize that, the DES, those female hormones in the womb had a bigger impact than I thought.
And that would be the proper course of treatment for these individuals with low, because a lot of MTFs do have lower androgen levels than the average guy. And I would think the proper course of action, instead of putting them on estrogen and having all sorts of procedures done, would be to work through this neurological impairment and add the correct hormones in their body. I mean, exactly. What a concept, I mean, but that would be too easy to do, a little bit too easy, I mean, it's like beyond me, why they do what they do. And it's really scary because now it's not just the older individuals. Now they're capturing the younger generation and not realizing that a lot of these younger individuals have not only neurological impairments, but they're also having endocrinological issues because of all the chemicals in the environment that's messing with their normal hormonal level. So the majority of them, I'm sure, the young boys who think they're girls have low T, and the girls who think they're boys have low E. So, instead of like, let's work really with the endocrine system the right way.
Yeah.
But, it wouldn't be as climactic, as sensational as it is now. So,
but it's pretty clear that the medical science has been hijacked by the trans lobby, because there's very little. It makes very little logical sense. The complete adherence to affirming treatment. It makes no logical sense from a medical science point of view.
Exactly. But because these individuals have deep pockets and they have the attention of these doctors that are not really ethical and these scientists that really don't know the science, this is why they've been able to push this along. There's a lot of corporatism involved in this spreading of this trans agenda.
Yeah.
And
I think, most doctors are just indoctrinated just like everybody else. So a lot of them are just ignorant. So.
And they're afraid. They're totally afraid of, speaking up.
I mean, you can be fired and
going against the grain. Yeah, they're very fearful. And I think they all need to stand together and speak up. That's why our voices as detransitioners are very important, because, it's like really sad. I mean, 60 Minute had a segment, and they were literally scolded for having a segment on detransitioners. And that's crazy.
Wow.
I mean,
it's ridiculous.
And we're going to see a lot more of us coming out, a lot more than people could even imagine. And I've said this way back when there was only a few detransitioners. I said, we're going to have a massive influx of detransitioners. And I'm saying it now, it's even going to be even more so than ever. And there's going to be a lot of lawsuits, and there's going to be a lot of people not happy with what's been done to them. So how did you go about gender transition, and what was it that actually led you to do that? I mean, what was that moment that you just decided, I don't want to be a man anymore, I want to be a woman?
I'd been struggling with them for quite some time, and then my relationship broke down. And I think in some ways that was like a protective barrier against transition. Once I'd lost that was like, that protection was gone. I went to see a psychologist. Well, first of all, I looked in a book, because this was before the internet, and it was like trying to find an answer to my gender confusion. And according to a book, I was a transsexual. And I was like, finally figured out what was going on. So I thought I had the answer. So I went to see a psychologist, and she immediately affirmed me. And because I was saying, I'm worried because I didn't really want to go against nature. And then she said, what about going against your own nature? And I was like, that seems to make sense. And then I was seeing a psychiatrist, and initially he was reticent to put me on hormones because he had helped some people transition who ended up committing suicide. So he was reticent to help me to transition. So in the end, I just got frustrated and went to see somebody else, and then just got on hormones straight away.
You mentioned about individuals that actually transitioned and they committed suicide. There is more suicide based on transition than there is otherwise. And exactly. These trans advocates are trying to push the other, and the other is there's barely anyone, but there was more so after the fact. And all the studies from Sweden and all the different studies that they've done all point to the direction that transitioning does not ever remove gender dysphoria or helps the situation. In my opinion, gender dysphoria does not exist. That's a term that's being used to push along the hormones and to push along the procedures. Everyone has some sort of discomfort with themselves.
Yeah.
But, the way they've pushed this, and they brainwash people to believe that there's something wrong with their gender, is just part of an agenda. What do you think about
Yeah.
what I just said?
Yeah, I believe that. I think it's like it's created a pathology around probably fairly normal, things that people go through, especially during adolescence. And yeah, because I mean, as the studies have shown in the past, where young kids had gender confusion, the vast majority ended up, when left to their own devices, ended up becoming comfortable with their biological sex. And for all we know, it's just one of those weird kind of phases that can happen in puberty.
And because hormones are all over the place during that time, and the
Yeah.
nervous system is going through a lot of changes because the nervous system is very reliant on the endocrine system. So these are things that
And
then
you're trying to find your way in the world, and you're trying to negotiate, your becoming an adult in a world, in a very confusing world as well.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's incredible that the true science is not being shown, and that these so-called gender specialists are pushing this without any true evidence, without any objective finding, without a shadow
Yeah.
of a doubt. There's no testing that says to anyone without a shadow of a doubt, you're born wrong. The brain and the body do not function differently from each other. And that's the biggest lie that these trans advocates try to tell people. My brain and my body don't match. There's just absolutely no such thing. And also the feelings thing, it's like, I feel. There's no feelings to gender. That's just like a dumb statement to ever make.
Yeah,
You know?
and and what other so-called medical condition is solely based on your own self-reporting?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, there's like no true testing. It's just fill in the blanks and tell me how you feel. And then everybody copies what everybody else says. Because I remember back in the day in 2003, there was hardly anyone on the internet. And so you start saying certain phrases and it catches on. And before you know it, everybody knew they were in the wrong body at the age of 3. I'm like, I mean, people don't catch on to this. This is also scripted. And then they go and change the DSM from gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria. How convenient.
Yeah.
It's just crazy stuff. So then you went to the so-called specialist and the psychologist and the psychiatrist, and then they eventually put you on hormones, and you went on the path of trying to change who you are.
Yeah. So I ended up with surgery as well. So an interesting experience with the surgery is that when I was about to, I was woken up in the morning ready for the operating theatre. And, when you wake up in the morning, sometimes you just take a moment to kind of come back to normal reality. And I was just like, my brain was just trying to kind of work through what I was actually doing. And in the moment, in the kind of, when something is imminent and it's just about to happen, you might have kind of more clear thoughts about things. And I was starting to kind of have some doubt about the surgery. But then what needed to happen at that point was they should have had someone that I could talk to, like a counselor or something, and gone. And if I'd allowed to work through that, I probably most likely would have delayed surgery. And eventually I would have not done it at all. But, and I've heard this before from other people, they try to rush you in there and try to prevent you from kind of, forming those kind of doubts. There was even one case in Britain where someone was actually wheeled into the operating theatre, kind of kicking and screaming. And that was a court case that person won.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was a disgrace.
Well, it's like jumping out of an airplane with a parachute. You're all psyched about it, but the moment you're going to jump off the parachute, off the plane and with a parachute, you're like having second thoughts because it's a massive change. You're literally maiming your body. And I don't understand where people get the concept that by literally filleting and inverting, that actually makes something that is very biologically and naturally made from the moment of conception. There are things that happen in the body, so you can't surgically alter the body and believe that it's something that it's not. And there are many doctors that have actually quoted that they don't make a man into a woman. They just kind of like facsimile, make something similar, but they know that it's not what they're actually creating.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really sad that they're not telling people the truth.
Yeah.
Because
and genetically you never change. So,
never.
And I think this is what happens with people. A lot of people detransition or eventually have kind of breakdowns when they're trans because they eventually kind of can't hide from themselves that they're biologically not that sex. And it's just, and then to wake up and realize what they've done. And it's just, sometimes it's too much for people.
It is. And then a lot of people just, they know that what they've done is wrong. They've lost their families and just a whole slew of things. But now what? Now what do they do? And a lot of them can't come to terms, like you and I, and many of us who are detransitioners, come to terms with reality and just throw in the towel and say, I'm not doing this anymore. And
I mean, I had done a lot of work before I detransitioned. So I was suffering from a lot of depression and I kind of refused antidepressants because I felt like my experience was a spiritual crisis rather than something that could be cured by drugs. So I kind of had a very in-depth kind of, partly with counselors, partly with myself and my own reading, kind of look at myself. And I think that helped a lot because I wasn't so attached to my identity. I'd let a lot of that go, and I wasn't so attached to the world even. It was just like when you're so stuck in something that you don't know there's anything else. If you encounter a problem with that, then it's the end of the world. But if you know there's a different reality, like a bigger spiritual reality, then you're not at so much at the whim of life's challenges, I guess.
Yeah, I get exactly what you're saying, because a lot of people invest everything in this transitioning, and they literally buy the whole identity thing, and they believe that they are who they say they are, and they put all their cards on the table and they have nothing else. And because they have nothing else, they can't even imagine not ever identifying as trans or as the gender that they transition to. And that's something that I believe these so-called gender specialists need to really work with people, help them work through this, because they should never, ever affirm a person and make them believe that they're something they're not. And I think that's where a lot of the problem lies, I
know. It's like they're doing it with adolescents that go to a school counselor, and there was no even hint that they were trans. But then suddenly they go to see a school counselor and they come out saying, "Oh, I'm trans."
Yeah.
They're so obviously pushing him in a direction.
Yeah, it's a power of suggestion.
Yeah.
And it's incredible, especially now with this rapid onset gender dysphoria. And just there was a wave there where these older individuals that were tired of their life, they're going through a middle-age crisis, and all of a sudden, bam, individuals married with children. Oh, I was born in the wrong body. I'm going to go live my best life. And it's like, it's like, no, you just need some good counseling and a little slap on the where and stop. It's beyond me. I mean, I can't keep myself quiet, and I'm not very much liked in the community because I once was a very strong advocate for transitioning, and now I'm very much against it. So, needless to say, I've made a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
So, how's life while living as a trans woman? Because I know we all have honeymoon stages. In the beginning, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm trans, guys. I'm the man's man, that kind of thing. But then, like you said, you start waking up to the fact, like that inner voice, and it's just like, it doesn't feel right. How was life in your initial honeymoon stage?
Yeah, it was. I was very much into playing soccer at that point, and my first thought was to play soccer with my own gender. It's like that's what I felt like I was doing. Finally, I get to play soccer with my own gender, and it was like I at the time the Olympics had just allowed transgender people to compete, and that was I think that happened around about in the early 2000s, and I thought, oh, this is great. Just trying to work around the discrimination. And if anyone had a problem with me, I was like willing to argue the point and say, I don't really have an advantage or anything. The truth is that I did lose a lot of muscle mass. In practice, it's not an elite level. It's kind of there may have been one or two women in the team that was able to kick further than me or run faster than me, but I was still up in the higher physical abilities, and I was tall as well. So, but looking back, I realized I didn't really have to make that much of an effort, as much as the other women with training. My chest capacity was bigger. There was nothing. My heart, everything, the heart, lungs. So, yeah, ultimately, I wouldn't have had to make as much of an effort.
Plus, the nervous system, the neuromuscular development, even though you might have lost some muscle mass, the memory is there. And the ability. Well, who was that tennis player who was a trans woman who came out to admit that there was no women that could match her, because of the fact that they were born a man and they had all the response, the reflexive movement, the size of the bones, the lung capacity, like you were mentioning, the heart rate, they recover faster, all sorts of different things. It's not fair at all. Women are losing out right now on records and getting scholarships and things of that nature because trans women are invading women's sports. And that's, pretty sad. So, did you ever believe you were a woman? And if so, what happened to change that way, the way of thinking?
Yeah, well, and people had said that to me when I was transitioning, and so, and my answer, are you able to have children? And my answer to it was always like, yeah, well, I wish I could, and I wish there was some kind of genetic therapy that could change every genetic cell in my body. I would like put my hand up for it. But yeah, ultimately that did the whole genetic thing, and it became obvious that it was just a superficial overwriting of my biology. It even when you're kind of taking female hormones and it does change the way you feel, but ultimately, as time went on, I started to feel more and more androgynous and started to make less and less of an effort. And started to care less about it, I guess you could say.
Right. So what would you say that gave you that feeling of feeling that you were a woman and that you rightfully were able to play in the sports of other women? I mean, what could you base that on? Because we really don't know what it feels like to be the opposite gender that we were born as.
Yeah,
What
exactly.
what I mean, and when I hear people say that, I feel like a woman, even though they were born a man. It's like, what are you basing your feelings on? You weren't born that way. You weren't socialized that way. There's not a cell in your body that says that you're a woman. What are you going by? And no one's ever
Yeah.
been able to answer me.
What you're going by is an imaginary feeling of what you think it is to be a woman or a man. That's all you have to go by.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the whole
So
concept of wanting to be a mother. It's like, I don't think that they would be able to handle that because for some reason, God made women with that ability to go through that laborious pain. I don't think a biological born male would be able to go through that pain. No insult, but it's, there's like men, even though they appear strong and they are stronger than women in the physical sense, but when it comes to pain tolerance and when it comes to certain things, they wouldn't be able to do it. There's
yeah,
just,
we're
it's
obviously
not
designed for different purposes. Yeah.
exactly. And you had
And
mentioned,
yeah, and when I was playing soccer, I kind of justified it partly because it was good for my mental health to participate and to physical activity, um, doing something with other people. It was, even though I was extremely shy and very autistic and didn't speak to many people, it was still, that's the way I kind of thought it. Well, you shouldn't discriminate against me because it's good for my mental health.
it's a form of validation. As I see that a lot in trans women. There's this Charlie, I think, is their name, and they're a race car driver, and they're a trans woman, and it's like, you know, or that Fox that fights in the MMA, and it's like they fight women. It's like it's almost like this craze of like, this is how I get to be validated, like going into female bathrooms. It's like a serotonin release, for being validated. And that's like the ultimate, I, yeah, I don't get it. Um, and I think it's very disrespectful to women to force, for trans women to force themselves on women. And especially the ones that claim now to be lesbians. And it's like, seriously? How can you be a lesbian? You were born a dude. I mean, or the same thing goes for trans guys that are attracted to men. All of a sudden, they identify as gay men. I'm like, no, you're heterosexual. I mean, it just makes no sense. You
Yeah.
know, totally no sense. So, did you do a lot of research regarding DES? I know that I did for a while, and definitely that messes with the endocrine system and it messes with the nervous system, and it does create a much weaker version of a man and a much more masculine version of a woman. And to me, that's personality. Our personality shouldn't dictate what gender we are. And that's very stereotypical for a group of
Yeah.
individuals who want to stay away from the stereotypical. They are very stereotypical.
Well, when I was looking into DES, I started to um, well, I mean, I know that it came in the 1940s, and in the 1930s, they had done experiments with rats with artificial estrogens, and they found that it's just like the DES when they gave it to the rats when there was rats developing in the womb. The male rats that were born started to show unnatural female behaviors. And because that was already known about a decade earlier, before they started to give these drugs out, it seems to me that it was, at least in certain circles, it would have been deliberate. The medical science had always been from that time kind of married to the pharmaceutical companies. So it was like, and the doctors were being kind of indoctrinated into that system of medicine. So to me, it's no stretch to think that it was deliberate mass effeminization of men you're talking about here. To me, it seems like a war on men, and that goes with the ideologies as well, like the feminism and everything else.
It was a way of really devaluing the family, getting the female out of the home, bringing her into the workplace, taking the children, indoctrinating them in the educational system, and like you said, defeminizing men so that they could do what they're doing to the world today. And I know a lot of people think of that as conspiracy and whatever else, but all we have to do is look around us and see what it actually.
It's just logical thinking. I mean, the early gay lobby started using those experiments on rats as a way to push getting accepted as a sexual orientation.
Right.
So who's to say that this mass feminization of men that not only helped create a lot of the early transsexuals, but also who's to say that it didn't impact on increasing the amount of homosexuality in men?
Exactly.
So
it's one big giant experiment, you know.
Yeah, and it's definitely an agenda, because I mean, it's like 3 months after I detransitioned, I came back to the Catholic Church that I was brought up in. And it wasn't long before I started to see the things that were happening in the Catholic Church at that time, from the 30s, were just mirrored what was happening in society. They'd been getting recruiting homosexuals into the seminaries from the 1930s. And if I'm going to kind of look at it and do more of a timeline about this, because the whole 20th century is just like it's a diabolical timeline of Marxism, and it's just people still think that our culture naturally evolved just to be like it is now, but it's been engineered. It's pretty clear.
Totally. Eugenics and the push for Marxism, the push for, and many people can't even fathom that that's what we're heading towards, you know, and with this transhumanism and all these crazy things that are being pushed upon us and our children. It's really sad.
And this isn't the end point. This isn't the end point now. We're right in the middle of these sweeping changes. It's not. It's not finished yet.
Not even. Yeah. People don't even have a clue. So, what characteristics in the autistic spectrum do you possess? And the reason I'm asking you this, because I believe that 99.999% of individuals in the trans community all possess some form of Asperger, autism, and some of them are not even aware, because self-actualization or self-awareness is not their most prominent features. You know, I mean, So,
I have like, I mean, it changed from when I was much younger. I mean, when I was very young, I had like periods of kind of being nonverbal, lots of rocking, and extremely quiet. I still get with the amount of social interaction, I have limits. So, for example, there might be just a time when I'm just going into a shop, just getting a couple of groceries. Might just be too much for me. Other days it would be fine, but then I'll just be like, it would cause like a lot of anxiety, and the anxiety would trigger like an asthma attack or something. And it still impacts for sure. I have other aspects like very much into rigid thinking. So if I am like, I've got a special interest, and which I have many, but most of the time when I'm into one thing at a time, it's so all-encompassing that I can't hardly focus on anything else. So whether it's like researching something or building something, I'm just like I literally can't even think about anything. And the other thing is facial recognition deficit, which is something that I only kind of clocked it like years later, like that people that I don't know well, I find it really hard to recognize them when I see them. And even someone I know reasonably well, if they change their appearance, their hairstyle, makeup, even wear different clothes, I don't automatically recognize them straight away. So yeah.
It's all part of the neurological impairment that allows us to become aware of things. And you were mentioning earlier, like sometimes socializing, you could only do little bits at a time, which happens with me. And I've learned to push myself, but it takes a lot out of me, and you become extremely tired after going through a social situation where you just need to like lay down, take a nap, lay down and just be alone. No stimulation whatsoever, or self-stimulating, like a rocking chair is the most soothing thing that I could ever do. Like I could sit in a rocking chair for hours and listen to music, or walking and listening to music as it's motion. Yeah. And that's just like calms down the nervous system, and you almost have to prepare yourself to be in a social environment, like a party or anything like that. It takes a lot out of a person.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And so to do relationships, I mean, it's very difficult to engage in relationships. It's almost like it's hard to show emotions. And if we do show emotions and they're not reciprocated correctly, we become very devastated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I kind of tend to have like high expectations with people, with relationships, and if there's a kind of level of trust there, I get deeply shocked if there's any kind of breach of that trust.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, I do hope that when people watch this, they get to learn a little bit more about themselves instead of the whole one size fit all, take the hormones and the surgeries. And so much that people could learn about themselves and why they behave the way that they do, that it has absolutely nothing to do with their gender, but nothing. That's like the focus, because like you said earlier, we become focused on one thing. And we are like the greatest investigative reporter there could ever be. Because we'll break it apart. We will figure that thing out like no one else could ever figure it out.
And that's right. And couple that with like intolerance of any kind of injustice.
Oh, yeah.
Corruption. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm telling you. It's it's crazy. So you did start a family, and was that before you transitioned?
Before, yeah. So that was it. It had its own difficulties, especially with undiagnosed autism.
Right.
And it wasn't a conventional kind of partnership I had, because my partner was she had lived as a lesbian part of the time, and I was like, we were both embracing feminism as well. I'm pleased to say that my ex is now also found the church as well, so I'm happy about that. But we've got 2 grown-up kids, and they seem fairly happy and well adjusted. So
That's good. That's good. So tell us a little bit about your faith. How did that come about? And once you did totally embrace God, Jesus, how did that bring upon peace in your life?
yeah, well, I always thought of myself as a spiritual person, even for the times I wasn't Christian. I was embracing paganism. When my family moved away drifted away from the church when I was about 16, that's kind of where I naturally ended up, into paganism. And so I stayed there for many, many years, even though I did take Jesus seriously as a teacher. I was far from being a Christian. When I detransitioned, I still held a lot of the attitudes from my leftist past, and I was very much into LGBT. And a friend told me about reparative therapy, and then I realized that Born That Way wasn't a thing anymore. That kind of got rid of that myth.
Yeah.
And once that happened, I realized that the church wasn't hateful and bigoted like I'd been led to believe. So that was the last stumbling block to prevent me from going back to the church. And I didn't even try to go back to the church. I just one day found myself just walking into a church completely unintentionally. And I sat down and asked God to welcome me back. And straight away I felt this overwhelming wave of love and welcoming, that it was just like incredible. From there, I kind of been working on myself in a kind of like spirituality, like with Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. I found that incredibly useful. But obviously there's a lot of things that Eckhart doesn't talk about. His message is a very specific one. So we shouldn't take it to mean that, that this is how the world works or anything, because his message is like a pinpoint specific about this certain issues about how you can experience life as a human. But when I found God again, I realized that this spiritual realm that I thought was like a dimension, you could say, was actually a personal thing now. It was an actual being. It wasn't just a place. It was an actual being, and this is God. And that made a big difference into how I constructed my spiritual beliefs, you could say. And I had a kind of a deep recognition that it was all real, like Jesus, the Holy Ghost, the Bible, everything. It's all real, and that was just for someone that was very much into science most of my life. It was it's an amazing awakening. Yeah.
It totally is. I mean, I could concur with everything you're saying. I used to listen to Eckhart Tolle, all the New Agey stuff, because I was always seeking truth. I would consider myself a truth seeker, and I was always very spiritual, to the point that I sold everything that I had, and I just went out in the middle of nowhere to try to find myself, my spirituality. And once you find Jesus, you find the answer. And I still don't understand it all. And I have these conversations with God. God, I don't understand it completely. And I think a lot of the miscommunication that I have is from learning all this new age stuff that kind of interferes a little bit and makes you question. And I think that's why Satan brings on this new age stuff to get us to question God, you know, and to have this sort of confusion. But once you surrender completely to Jesus Christ and make him your Lord and Savior and allow the Holy Spirit to work in you and through you, life is so much different. And it's, you know, it's like not instantaneous healing. It takes time, and it takes a lot of spiritual work and a lot of healing that has to be done. But it's definitely a massive change from where we were, from all this Edgar Tolle and, you know, believing we're gods ourselves and all that crazy stuff.
Yeah. And when I was became a Christian, for the first few weeks, I was like on a spiritual high, and I was like, wow, this is just amazing. But then suddenly, like, bam, these temptations started hitting me. And I realized that it's not just all love and light as a Christian. There is Satan, there is evil, this is spiritual warfare. So what was going on was that before I came back to Christ, Satan had no need to tempt me, because I was already, you know, in a sense, his property already.
Right.
But then when I found God, I was like, yeah, the temptations were just over the top, ridiculous. And I've always had like a pretty good spiritual sense. Like I'm able to kind of sense spirits, and I've seen ghosts and all this kind of stuff. So I can sense evil, and I know that it's a real thing. And you know, this world is an arena of spiritual warfare.
Do you get attacked at nights? Because I get attacked all the time. Like when I go to sleep, and when you sleep, you kind of visit that spiritual realm. And I've had individuals tell me that I have these, like, I speak in tongues and I have these battles, you know, while I'm in my sleep state. And then sometimes I've woken up, and it's almost like they follow me to this realm till they disappear. Because when I open my eyes, there it is. And it's like Satan doesn't like to lose one of what he considers his, you know. And
sometimes I've been when Satan can't get you when you're awake, if you're too vigilant, then he'll try when you're asleep as well. Yeah,
I get that a lot. You know, I get that a lot. He can't get me when I'm awake, but he definitely tries to get me while I'm asleep. But I put up a fight, because, I mean, the things they've told me before, I sit there and I'm like battling, literally my whole body's moving and I'm speaking in tongues and I'm like, no, and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, it's pretty pretty intense.
It's almost shocking to me that atheists can get away with not seeing the evidence. They just want to ignore the evidence. There's so much evidence of this, what we're talking about. Like, there's miracles, there's demonic possession,
and spiritual warfare. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We wrestle against spiritual principalities. You know, it's real. And I believe people are going to be in for a rude awakening, because we're coming to end times, and a lot of things are going to be revealed. And a lot of people are not going to be able to deal with it, because they're living in la la land. And when things like this come to volition, they're not going to do very well. So I know that you have a message and very strong views regarding transitioning. Can you actually share a little bit of that, you know, with us? Like on your bio, you say your message is to call into question transgender affirming treatments and promote the necessity to accept the priority of biological sex over gender ideology.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard of there's a lot of detransitioners out there that kind of go, oh, well, it wasn't right for me, but it was, you know, I don't have the right to say that it's not right for everybody else. It seems the height of arrogance to say what I think is right for everybody else. But it's like, first of all, I know that it's not right for everybody else genetically, because we can't change that. That's the scientific aspect of it. And then there's the religious aspect of it as well, in which God created us to be male and female.
Mm-hmm.
And there is, and there is this like illogic about it as well. It's like we were saying before, how do we know what the other gender feels like? So nobody can really answer that question, and that's the basis of transition. It's like transition seems to rest on such flimsy foundations.
There's nothing concrete.
Yeah,
nothing concrete.
The medical sciences, like obviously brought the agenda, and it people have outlined this before, how the medical professional bodies get duped into accepting it by pressure groups, and there's definitely not kind of scientific consensus about it. It is based on it's almost like a culture war, like very, very much along Marxist lines.
Yes.
And like so many aspects of the left, where they use science kind of when it suits them, but they can drop it.
None of the ideologies fit, and they negate one another. And the way I look at it, because it's like I'm the same duplicate as you. I believe the same exact thing that you believe in. And if you look at history and you look at the journals, there was not any recorded history of children saying that they were born wrong. That would have been in the journals for sure. That would have been such an interest, because half of these scientists, they're like mad scientists and they love to play with people. Eugenics is a very big thing. There's not the record of the so-called people committing suicide because they didn't get to be who they were. So all of a sudden, everybody wants to not be here because they don't get to be who they want. All this stuff is based on junk science, on subjective reporting, and none of it holds its weight in any piece of paper or in anything. And the way that it's moved so quickly, it's all based on corporatism.
Yeah.
And
to me, when people are given the options, people have said, now you have a sexual orientation, it's called, homosexual. Now you have transgender. You have these options. And what do you think is going to happen? People take up those options. But if they weren't there, less people would take them up.
Exactly.
It's like, that's the reason why more people take them up, because they're options now.
It's being promoted. It's like a marketing scheme. They're just like pushing it out there. Come one, come all. And I truly believe there's no such thing as gender dysphoria. I don't believe there's such a thing as a transgender person. They're just labeling it. And then people go and say, well, there are people in the past, the indigenous people, they know themselves as two-spirited. They went with the roles. There were some men that took on the role of women and some women that took the role of men. But they didn't take hormones. They didn't perform any type of surgeries. They didn't identify as the opposite gender. They took the role because they felt more comfortable. And that's called personality. We all have one.
Yeah.
But
and in this day and age, when the Western world has allowed so much freedom with those roles now, and yet that doesn't make people more comfortable, apparently, in their gender. There seems to be there's more trans now than there ever was. So
I know
it's not that.
It's like, is there something in the water? Are we, are we? Because it's incredible. It's like a boom.
I know it's like a 4,000% increase in the last few years or something.
It's crazy. And it's being pushed in cereal boxes now. And I mean, it's everywhere. People are like wanting to be called they, them, and all this, it's like, what's going on with us? Did we travel through some black hole or something? Did we pick up some static somewhere? I mean, you gotta make a joke out of it, because it's really scary what's happening here.
Yeah, it's almost like a mass insanity. That's the way I see it.
Big time. People don't even have a clue. So we need to like really redirect this somehow, some way, and stop it before it gets completely out of control. We're near that out of control stage. I think if we, the people of the world, if we say enough of this and put our foot down, we may be able to stop it. But if people continue to be complacent and they're too afraid to be called a transphobe or a homophobe or whatever else, then we're going to lose this battle.
So I try to, whenever I kind of speak to people, I try to say, give them permission. You say, you don't have to agree with this. It's like wherever you go, there's people kind of thinking that they have to agree with it because everybody's doing it. So I'll just kind of fall into line. No, but we don't. We don't have to agree with this.
Not at all. And people have to save the families, save righteousness, morals, and save people from themselves, because, I truly am very empathetic, and realize that what these individuals are going through is based on trauma, and they're not even aware what's being done to them. They're being used to push an agenda. They're being used to medicalize a condition that really is not a condition at all. It's been made into one, because since the beginning of time, we've all had a personality. Some girls are a little bit more masculine than other girls. Some men are a little bit more feminine than other men. Some individuals are like you. They're timid. They're shy. Some women are like me, who are like, we just don't take any BS from anybody. But that doesn't make me a man. And that doesn't make you a woman. We just have to embrace our personalities.
Yeah. So. And it's like, and it doesn't mean you lack compassion if you're saying to somebody, I don't agree with that you're changing your body is an appropriate thing to do. It's not a lack of compassion, because it's like it's telling the truth that you can't literally change sex, and it can't be a hateful thing to do just to tell the truth. It's like,
well, that's what they're trying to do. I mean, I get told that I'm a transphobe, I'm a hater, I'm promoting violence, and all these things that are like, are you people for real? Just because I don't affirm you, just because I don't validate you, doesn't mean I hate you and I'm trying to get you killed. Because they don't know how to think any other way. You're either with us or against us. That's their mentality. They don't understand that you don't have to agree with them. And it doesn't mean you don't love them and you don't like them as a person. It just means you don't agree with what they're doing.
And people often say, Christians are hateful and bigoted. But if we did hate somebody, then we would just leave them alone and say, okay, you're fine. Go ahead. Go do what you're doing. We know that, this is not going to end well for you in the long term. And it's like, we would just leave them to it. But it's love that actually makes you want to actually reach out to people and say, other sinners are like, we don't put ourselves on a pedestal. We're not like better than anyone.
Love tells the truth. Love doesn't want someone to get hurt. And we've been there. We've done that. I lived as a trans guy for 17 years and 22 years as a lesbian. That's 40 years of my life as a member of the LGBT. I know how it feels to be looked down upon. I know how it feels to be made fun of.
Yeah.
But I also know that once I allowed myself to realize the truth that living that way was not going to benefit me in any which way, then I was able to get out of that lifestyle thanks to my Heavenly Father and to praying individuals in my life that prayed for my salvation. And God listens. You know, I always say, even if you're not religious, even if you don't believe in God, even if you don't believe in Jesus, this path is not the right path. It's going to destroy you from between all the chemicals that you're putting in your body, between all the surgeries that you're performing, and the time that your mind will go against you, because it's a matter of time where your own conscience starts to speak to you, because the body just cannot deal with the kind of trauma it's been put through.
And it's really telling that they don't want to hear detransitioner stories. It's like just to be a detransitioner and tell your story is considered to be hateful amongst these trans advocates, and it's like that's got to be pretty telling.
Yeah, well, because they know that us existing proves that their MO is BS.
Yeah,
the bottom line, us existing,
they can't tolerate our existence.
Exactly, because we show the truth in their lives, so we're dangerous for them.
Yeah,
extremely dangerous. Is there anything else you would like to add?
On that note of exposing lies and falsehoods, there's so many in this world at the current time, and it's like if this is just one little aspect of it that I can help expose the lies, then and there's so many other aspects of it as well.
There's a lot. The rabbit hole goes very deep, Jeremy, very, very deep. People are just not aware. They're so dead asleep. They're so busy working, paying for stuff they don't need. They can't even be a normal family. I mean, people don't spend any time with their children, and the state and the schools are taking over the minds of their children, and they're wondering what's happening. It's because they're lacking the parental skills to be a parent, because they're out there in the job field working and working and working. Some of them to try to make ends meet, others to try to keep up with the Joneses. And the whole women's lib and the whole, Marxist mentality and everything that's taking place in the world is there to divide us so they could conquer. The rabbit hole goes very deep.
Yeah, indeed.
Very, very deep. What can you do?
You got to keep fighting.
Yeah, that's about it. So would you like to end our broadcast with a prayer?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dear Lord, please help those people that are deluded and been impacted by false ideologies, indoctrinated. Please help them to wake up, especially people who are in the medical science arena, dealing with the transgender issue on the front line. And please help people to wake up and to be touched by our detransition stories and other stories like that. I ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Father, you are capable of doing anything and everything. We know that your will be done, and that the enemy's time is limited. But we ask, Father, to be able to bring to the kingdom into your side all those that are dead asleep right now, that are walking around with veils in their eyes, and they don't understand that their flesh is being governed by the devil. And we need these individuals, Father, to be released from all these generational curses, from all the things that have led them into this lifestyle. You could do anything, Father. Help those of us continue to plant seeds and help others come home to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, Jeremy. Thank you so very much. And this should be airing on the 17th. I might give put it on my Patreon for my patrons to watch before I air it on the 17th. But I'm very thankful that you were able to do this. I know that we were trying to schedule it. It was like we are totally different. Like it's 8:49 where I'm at, and it's probably like 11:50 where you're at right now, or something like that.
Yeah.
In
Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing. And that's all we can do is try to spread his message and try to help others wake up from this nightmare, this nightmare, basically. But
and to be able to do it joyfully as well, just like with a joyful spirit. Yeah.
Exactly. Amen. All right. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. And I'm used to doing this live, so it's very strange not doing a live show, but I didn't want not to share Jeremy's story, which is a very important story to share. I'll catch you guys. I love you, but remember to always love yourselves too and each other. Bye-bye.
Thank you.